Hi guys, so let's talk a little bit about if red is a warm or cool color. I've gotten a lot of questions about this and, been asked, why do I call red a neutral color? Is it not a warm color? So I want to talk about color theory. I want to talk about image consulting, interior design, and personal color analysis, and the circumstances under which we call red a warm color versus when we call it a neutral color. So there's a dichotomy. So in color theory, red is absolutely widely considered to be a warm color. In image consulting, red is considered to be a neutral color. Now, why do I say neutral, right? So I say neutral because the way I think of it is usually we have warm reds and cool reds, and most color analysts would agree that if you add a little bit of yellow to red, you call that a warm red, and then if you add a little bit of blue to red, you call it a cool red. And that kind of implies that between warm and cool, there is a neutral red. So then you start to combine color analysis with color theory. So color analysts will go ahead and read about color theory and realize that red is considered to be warm, and then we run into issues where people are saying that if you add red to a gray color, that makes it a warm gray, which is not exactly true for our purposes, because again, in color analysis, we consider anything that is blue-based to be cool and anything that's yellow-based to be warm. In color theory, it's really a little bit different. So in color theory, we have the definition of a warm color being anything that's high energy, anything that's dynamic. And so that's the main difference, that, magenta will be a warm color in color theory because it's dynamic and bright. In color analysis, we consider magenta to be cool because it's blue-based. At the same time, in color analysis, when we're talking about skin tones and undertones, we really care if the skin tone is yellow-based or blue-based, and we don't care so much about the red in the skin. So red versus green-based, that's more like if you have an olive skin tone versus a pinkish undertone. That's a different story, and I don't really have an answer for you why that matters for us more, how much yellow versus how much blue you have. But I want to talk a little bit about color theory now for a while, and then we're going to talk about color analysis again. We'll talk about the fun stuff, we'll give some celebrity examples, etc. So let's talk about color theory now. And I did find this quote: there is historical disagreement about the colors that anchor the polarity between warm and cool, but 19th century sources put the peak contrast somewhere between red-orange and greenish-blue. So that's something that I would agree with, even in terms of color theory, but that is not the widely accepted color theory. So usually red is considered warm and magenta is also considered warm, but this is how I would personally split the color wheel, both in terms of color theory and in terms of color analysis, into warm and cool. But the way that it's widely taught is to split it halfway through like this, and you can see that red, violet, and magenta are considered to be warm colors. So those colors are more dynamic and they're considered to be brighter. Now, but it is worth noting that if you asked any artist, any painter, and you asked them, look, I'm a color analyst, I really care if a color is blue-based or yellow-based, no one would tell you ever that magenta is yellow-based. Magenta is a blue-based red. But at the same time, let's talk about magenta now. So magenta in this piece is really serving to warm up the piece, make it more dynamic, and you can really see how magenta, even though it's blue-based, because it has some red, it is really bringing warmth to the piece. Now, that doesn't mean that it's yellow-based. It simply means that it's warmer than the blue. And that's sort of my opinion on it, is that just because a color is warmer than blue, that doesn't make it warm. And here's another example. So you can see that the red here, it really brings a lot of warmth, a lot of energy to both of these pieces, and the blue is, considered to be a cool color simply because it is a bit more calming, and the red is a bit more vibrant and more dynamic. But if you compare red to yellow and you take a look at this art piece, you can really see that the yellow is much warmer and the red is sort of not as warm as the yellow. So In my opinion, I would still, even in color theory, obviously in color analysis for our purposes, red is neutral because it's not blue based and it's not yellow based. But even in color theory, I would call red neutral because it's not as warm as yellow, but it's also warmer than blue, so it's in the middle, so I would call it neutral. So when you compare an art piece that has all three primary colors, like these two pieces, I hope you can see what I see. I see that the yellow is really the most dynamic color, it's the brightest, and the blue is the calmest color, so it's the coolest, and the red is sort of in the middle. So again, in my opinion, even in terms of color theory, I would call red neutral because it's in the middle. I sort of think of it as, okay, well, if you're in really cold weather and you walk into a building that's not heated, that building might feel quite warm to you, but that's only because you're comparing it to the cold outside weather, not because it's actually warm. In reality, that building might actually be 50 degrees Fahrenheit, not that warm, and compared to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, it would be considered actually cool. So anyway, that's kind of how I see yellow, red, and blue. Of course, if you compare red to blue, it's going to seem like it's warm, but in my opinion, that's not how I see it. Anyway, let's move forward. So now we have color theory for art pieces and personal color analysis. So you can really see the difference here. So it's again, the splitting of it is different because the purposes are different. So in color analysis, we really care if the skin is yellow based, and we call that warm, and potentially incorrectly. And this is not something that we can fix at this point because it's not consistent exactly with color theory to call it warm, so it's causing a lot of confusion. But we call strictly yellow based warm and blue based cool. It doesn't cause any confusion for cool colors, but it is causing a lot of confusion for the warm seasons, thinking that, oh, well, red is a warm color, so adding red to gray or adding red to blue is going to make it warmer, things like that. It's not going to make it warmer. It's only going to make it more neutral to, for our purposes, because red, again, for our purposes, is neutral. But let's go back to magenta now. So remember, in this art piece, magenta really served to warm up the piece, make it more dynamic. So let's see what happens when a warm season Eva Longoria wears magenta versus when she wears a warmer red. And you can see that in the warmer red, she looks much better. I think that color really suits her really well. And in the magenta, it's not as good for her as the warm red. And in the same way, we have another example. So we have her in magenta again and in a warm red. And I think the warm red looks much more harmonious with her skin because we really care about the amount of yellow in the skin. And again, I don't have an answer for you why that matters so much, why it matters so much more, the yellow in the skin versus, the red in the skin. I just know that it matters more, and you can see it here with Eva, and you can see it again in the next example. We have her wearing magenta versus a warm red, and she looks much better in the warm red than in the magenta. And also Oprah Winfrey, and I think that magenta looks quite separate from Oprah, but on the right, you can really see that warm red on Oprah looking really amazing. So, having a lot of red in a color, like magenta is primarily red, is not really helping our warmth situation, right? It's not really making it so that the color looks just as harmonious on these warm season ladies as the actual warm color, the yellow based color that we're talking about. And here is finally Hayden Panettiere, and Hayden Panettiere also looks better in a warm red than she does in magenta. And I think that's because in color analysis, we really care more about how much yellow the color has and how much yellow the skin has, and matching that amount of yellow in the skin with the yellow in the clothing. So finally, we have an example of Alicia Keys. So she has quite pink red undertones, and she also is cool and bright, so she has blue undertones as well. And you can see that the red undertones in her skin really don't make her any warmer for our purposes. They're just red undertones. It's a cool red undertone that she has, and it makes her cool and bright. It doesn't make her warmer. We're talking about Alicia Keys has more red than she does green, and so If you want to know more about that, you can watch my video on olive skin tones about, more green in the skin, but Alicia Keys is the opposite of that. She doesn't have that much green in her skin, she has more red, but the red does not serve to warm her up at all. Anyway, that's it, you guys. In color theory, we have warm is considered to be a dynamic high energy color, and in color analysis, we have warm is more yellow based than blue based. So that is the difference, and it's really important not to mix these up, because then you start to get into situations where you're telling warm seasons to wear things like magenta, where magenta really doesn't suit them, or purple. Purple doesn't really suit warm seasons that much, definitely not as much as peach or a warm green would, although purple and magenta are better than blue because at least they don't have as much blue, so they aren't as cool, but they still don't have any warmth to them either. So I hope that made sense. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think that this basically answers any questions you may have had, or if this brings up more questions, more concerns, then definitely share that as well. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.